Welcome to the iPad Podcast, a weekly podcast from Mac's Future.
Okay, welcome to the iPad Podcast. This is Lex at Mac'sFuture.com, and today is February 7th, 2012, and this is, episode 88 of the iPad Podcast. So we're almost up to 2 years of the iPad Podcast. I started it right after the first iPad came out. This is a chit-chat-free podcast, so if you want to support it, you can give it positive reviews in the iTunes store and subscribe there in the iTunes app. And, let's get to it. We discuss iPad-related news, iPad-related apps, and iPad-related devices. So let's go to it. Okay, so one of the first things to discuss is there's been some clarification by Apple that, in relation to that controversy regarding the iBooks Author app. That was the program that came out that's free for the Macintosh that allows you to create all sorts of multimedia ebooks that work particularly well in iBooks on the iPad. And Apple released it mainly so that teachers and textbook authors could create very interesting multimedia, complex ebooks that are very sort of interesting. And they made it free, but there was a lot of controversy because it basically said, look, you can give away the format, an ebook in that format for free, but if you want to sell it, you got to sell it only through Apple and iBooks. And some people on the internet, who read the terms of service thought that if you create a book and put text into this iBooks Author app, then basically Apple owns the rights to the app or to the book, and that you have no choice. You can't publish it anywhere else. And I pointed out, some people queried me about it, and I pointed out that actually the terms of service said any ebook generated by the iBooks Author app you had to sell if you're going to sell it through the iTunes or the iBook store. But it said the keyword was generated, and other people interpreted that, and I did too, to mean that, look, if you wrote the text somewhere else and copied and pasted into iBooks Author, you could take that text out and copy and paste it in another app like Pages, which creates a standard ebook, and then submit it and sell it in a Kindle store, that Apple was not restricting you. Well, sure enough, Apple issued an update a couple of days ago to iBooks Author, and they updated the licensing agreement. And I'm looking at the MacRumors site, and it basically says Apple clarifies iBooks Author licensing. And so the new language says if you want to charge a fee for work that includes, here I'm going to zoom into it, if you want to charge a fee for work that includes files in the .iBooks format generated using iBooks Author, you may only sell or distribute such work through Apple, and such distribution will be subject to a separate agreement with Apple. This restriction does not apply to the content of such works when distributed in a form that does not include files in the .iBooks format. So basically, they clarified the terms to make it clear that only if you create an ebook that's in the form of the .iBooks format and try to sell it, do you have to sell it through the iBook store. But if you create an ebook, remember the iBooks Author program allows you to also export an ebook as a PDF. And also you can cut and paste that text and create a standard ebook through Pages. So basically Apple's saying, look, only if it's in the .books format do you have to sell it through Apple. And you can take that content and copy and paste it and sell it anywhere else you want. So, there was, and remember, the ZDNET guy, Ed Bott, said, oh, Apple's evil because Apple is going to own your book and make you distribute it. You can't sell it anywhere else. No, if Apple really wanted to do that, they'd make it clearer in their in their EULA that they were going to do that. I think people just jumped the gun and started condemning Apple with, when the language was really ambiguous. And frankly, the language was pretty clear to me. It said any book generated by the app. So if you didn't generate the book by the app, it didn't say the contents of anything you put in the app is restricted. So anyways, people are, that controversy came and went, and it doesn't mean anything. Much ado about nothing. And, frankly, I think the iBooks app is great. The iBooks author app is great. I could see, using it to create family books. You could drag videos and photos of your family and write stories about like what happened, your trips, and create sort of multimedia iBooks, ebooks for your family. And like, my mother has an iPad, and I have some kids, her grandkids, and I could create a very interesting multimedia family book where I say, here the kids did this and that, and here's the video, and here's the photo. Anyways, you can do a lot of fun things. It's a very cool app, and it's free, and it works on a Macintosh, so check it out. Now, the iBooks author app comes out at a very interesting time because ebooks are clearly on the rise, and so are textbooks that are digital. And there's a story, actually I saw it on Yahoo Finance in the AP News. The AP News has a story entitled Challenge to Schools Embracing Digital Textbooks. Lighten the backpack. Obama administration challenges schools to embrace digital textbooks. And it basically says that Education Secretary Arne Duncan and Federal Communications Chairman Julius Genachowski on Wednesday, I guess that was earlier this week or last week, challenged schools and companies to get digital textbooks in students' hands within 5 years. And it goes on to say that the Obama administration's push comes 2 weeks after Apple announced it would start to sell electronic versions of standard high school books for use on its iPad tablet. So it looks like the federal government is endorsing going to digital textbooks. And they're probably doing it because it's going to be, cheaper. Here's a quote from Duncan, who's the education secretary. He says, quote, "Do we want kids walking around with 50-pound backpacks and every book in those backpacks costing $50, $60, $70, and many of them being out of date? Or do we want students walking around with a mobile device that has much more content than was ever imaginable a couple of years ago and can be constantly updated? I think it's a very simple choice," end quote, Duncan said in an interview. So, that's in a way like an endorsement of the iPad by the federal government, because really, in terms of, being interesting ebooks, there's really nothing else out there. The Android devices aren't doing much, and the Kindle Fire is somewhat limited in terms of size and content. Genachowski, who's, I guess, the FCC chairman, he said, what did he say here? He says, quote, "When a student reads a textbook and gets to something they don't know, they are stuck." Then Genachowski goes on to say, quote, "Working with the same material on a digital textbook, when they get to something they don't know, the device can let them explore. It can show them what a word means, how to solve a math problem that they couldn't figure out how to solve," end quote. So, that sounds like he's talking about the iPad. What else could he be talking about? Another, I guess, person in the government says, "We're not talking about the print-based textbook now being digital. We're talking about a much more robust and interactive and engaging environment to support learning." So, it seems like a pretty solid endorsement from the United States government for electronic multimedia textbooks of the type that are going to be on the iPad. Anyways, it's, I think we're entering a very important time in education. Okay, so this past Sunday night, as many of you know, was the big Super Bowl game between the Giants and the Patriots, and the Giants won. And it was, I guess, one of the first Super Bowls where the iPad, was prevalent. And ZDNET had an interesting article entitled by James Kendrick entitled "iPad Invasion of the Super Bowl." And basically he's pointing out how the iPad was everywhere. He says yesterday was the Super Bowl, otherwise known as the big game, and millions of folks in the U.S. headed to parties dedicated to watching the game and the ads. And then he goes on to say, I did the same and took along my iPad to augment the viewing experience. And then he goes on to say, well, I figured I was the only guest at the party geeky enough to bring the tablet. He pointed out that at the party there were actually 3 iPads in attendance, including mine. It seems that it is becoming more commonplace for iPad owners to carry them to places they would previously never have dared to bring them. Now, what's interesting about his observation? I was today watching some of the footage of the Giants parade. They were being honored in New York City for their Super Bowl win, and they were showing the Giants like riding along in the trucks that hold them up as they go through the streets of New York. And I noticed at least one Giant player was holding up his iPad and using the iPad to video the audience. So it's not just the attendance at parties, but some of the players themselves are really into the iPad. And he also pointed out that there was a free app on the iPad that allowed Android devices and iPads to watch the game on the device. And it basically says that the app was an interactive sideline into the game action in real time. And so you could have downloaded this Super Bowl app. It was released by Chevy, and I guess there were Chevy ads in it. And also the Chevy had a contest and gave away 20 new cars for app users who use the app. So it's, the apps are becoming sort of clever marketing devices when there are big events like the Super Bowl. So, I think we're going to see more and more of this where the iPad becomes sort of a device to help promote products and to watch big events like the Super Bowl. Well, some people think the iPad's only going to get more popular. There was an interesting story in Apple Insider, really was reporting on something an analyst from Deutsche Bank said. That the analyst was Chris Whitmore. The article was entitled Third Generation iPads, quote, Window of Opportunity, end quote, expected to drive Apple market share gains. This is by someone named Neil Hughes. And basically the analyst, I think sort of stated something that's kind of obvious, and he says that the line between tablets and notebook computers is rapidly blurring as devices like the iPad become more powerful. And the analyst, according to this article, noted that the iPad's abilities are expanding to include textbooks, medical diagnostic tools, and pilot flight bags. And I mean, clearly the iPad, every generation of the iPad is getting more powerful and can do more things, and developers are doing more interesting things with them, and people who make hardware are doing more interesting things. And I think for a lot of people it's now replacing having a computer, and I think you could. Anyways, that's the point that this analyst is making. But he says, with the third generation iPad expected to arrive in March, Whitmore, this is the article, says, sees Apple announcing a new model with high-resolution display, a quad-core CPU, graphics performance 4 to 5 times faster than the iPad 2, and Siri voice control, and additional power in so-called iPad 3. So his point is that the iPad 3 will just make the iPad even more popular and further erode notebook sales. And basically the analyst said that combined with data from IDC, it suggests that Apple currently has 25% of the combined notebook and tablet market. In other words, before, the people who were tracking this stuff weren't including the iPad in the regular computer market, but now that they're saying, look, let's create a market that is called the notebook and tablet market. In other words, the sort of mobile, large computing market. And basically, if you look at that, Apple has 25% share of the combined notebook and tablet market, and the next closest competitor is Hewlett-Packard with just 12% of that market. And he points out also the obvious, which is that none of iPad's competitors have come close to the iPad in the last 12 months, and that most of their sort of Me Too offerings, and you know, even the Kindle Fire is Me Too. And they have a chart here on this Apple Insider article where it shows the notebook and tablet market share since the iPad was introduced in 2010. If you look at it, Apple was at 0 because it didn't really have a notebook. Its laptops weren't notebook size. And if you look at it, this is the red line of the iPad. It just goes up to 25%, and companies like Acer and Asus, they're just going down. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. You know, what is the iPad really competing with? It's really competing with notebooks, right? Because are you going to get both a notebook and an iPad? No, you'd probably get like an iPad and like an iMac, or like a large computer, or an iPad and a large laptop. So I think it's a very valid analysis. And I guess this Deutsche Bank analyst, he put a buy rating for Apple stock with a price target of $600. I think as of today, it's trading at around, $460. Now, more and more people are going to be using the iPad in their work, and I found an interesting article on MacWorld.com by Dan Morin, dated February 6th of this year, and he works for Macworld, and he writes for Macworld, and he posts stories on Macworld's website, and he basically is trying to use the iPad at work. And so he has a story entitled The iPad at Work, Day 1. And it sounds like, he's making some adjustments. Now, he's going to probably be using the iPad differently than other people at work, because his big thing is writing and then posting stuff on a website. So it looks like one area that he had some glitches was how to edit raw HTML on the iPad. And he says, quote, I immediately ran into glitches. For example, the CMS tool allows me to edit in either raw HTML or what you see is what you get view. The raw HTML view worked fine on the iPad, but the what you see, what you get editor didn't. I just got a blank white screen. So then he goes on, I fortunately had a fallback plan. I copied the raw HTML and pasted it into a text editor. And so he says he ended up using Writing Kit, which is a $5 app, and TextForce, which is a $3 app. But the point is, this is a very specialized area, and there's going to be glitches. So it looks like he's working through the glitches and trying to use it. He also uses it with email and stuff like that. So look, I don't think for everybody the iPad is going to be a complete replacement for a regular computer at work, but more and more it's going to be as it gets more powerful. Think about what people do at work, right? A lot of people use word processors. Well, the iPad, a lot of people aren't going to be comfortable typing on the screen, but you can easily pair the iPad with a Bluetooth keyboard. I use the Apple Bluetooth keyboard, and then it's easy to type. The other thing you can do is since the iPad has video out, including HDMI video out, you could have like a second monitor at work and have, let's say, the word processor appear on a big screen, through the iPad. Now, why would you do that? Because you can have the mobility of the iPad. When you want to go to a meeting, you just unconnect it and go to the meeting. But when you want to do, writing and have a bigger screen, you can just use a second monitor. So that's one thing that people use a lot of. Also, people use spreadsheets. You have the numbers spreadsheets. It's not as powerful as Excel. I do think that eventually Microsoft's going to release the full Office suite for the iPad. But anyways, it's interesting, this article. I have a link to it by the author Dan Morin on MacWorld.com, and you should check it out. But remember, he's coming at it from the perspective of someone who writes for and publishes to the web. I mean, frankly, I find it easy to post on my blog, Mac's Future. It's on Tumblr, and I use the Tumblr app to post to macsfuture.com. Often I write what I want to post in pages and just cut and paste into the Tumblr app. So it's very doable. Now, speaking of Microsoft and using the iPad at work, in the past I've mentioned that Microsoft has been releasing apps in the iOS store, Apple's App Store, and for the iPad. And Macnn.com had a story out. When did it have it out? February 6th, entitled Microsoft Prepping Dynamics CRM Apps for iPad Other Devices. And I'm not as familiar with that app, but I guess it is very sort of useful in business. Now, the article says Microsoft is at work on several mobile app versions of its Dynamics CRM platform, a preview reveals. This includes an app for iOS devices which will require iOS 5, but have native iPad and iPhone interfaces. And it goes on to say other apps are being designed for other platforms. And it goes on to say that mobile access will cost companies $30 a month per seat. The apps should begin arriving in the second quarter of the year. And then it goes on and says, as part of the general Dynamics update, Microsoft is also promising a web client that works across all modern internet browsers on various platforms. And I never actually heard of this program, but it says, like other CRM suites, Dynamics is meant to centralize a number of business tasks. This includes everything from basic tasks like communications and appointments to tracking leads, orders, and products. So it's sort of like an app, Dynamics, for salesmen and people in the field, I guess. So it's if Microsoft is investing in the iPad with these apps, you've got to think that they're definitely going to be releasing Microsoft Office. Why would they go to the trouble of releasing all these other Microsoft-related apps on the iPad, but not the Microsoft Office suite, which is its moneymaker? And since the iPad is just so voluminous now, I mean, how 55 million have been sold. I mean, imagine if Microsoft sold, I don't know, an official Microsoft Office suite for the iPad for $100 for all the apps. And let's say, I mean, if you sold 55 million times $100 is $5 billion worth of revenue. So, there's potential big bucks for Microsoft on the iPad. Now, the iPad and Apple could be getting some heat in China, of all places. I don't know if you've been following this, but there's been various stories that Apple may not own the trademark for the iPad name in China. And a story was out in Bloomberg that says Beijing city officials are starting to investigate Apple Inc. rights to the use of the iPad trademark after a complaint by a unit of Hong Kong listed ProView International. So I guess this group is claiming the rights to the iPad, and they've sued Apple in China, and they're seeking, I think, like $1 billion or something like that. So, Apple makes a lot of money, so, so people are coming after Apple for money. Now, it's interesting, Apple can't just really pull out of China. It makes its iPads there, and there's a huge market to sell there. So they're appealing an earlier decision that basically said they may have violated the trademark of the iPad, and I'm just wondering how it's going to be resolved. I mean, is there truly a rule of law in China where they can get a fair hearing? And maybe they'll have to pay off some money to resolve the issue of who's got the name iPad in China. So we'll have to follow that story. Okay, so to show you how far the iPad has come in being a enterprise tool, in other words, something used in business, I saw what's arguably one of the most interesting headlines recently about the iPad. It was in the CourierMail.com in, I guess, Australia, and the title was "iPadless Pilot Sues Virgin Australia for $1 million over back injury after lifting hard copy manuals." And this is really fascinating. It says here, a Virgin Australia pilot is suing the airline for more than $1 million in lost earnings and medical expenses because he was not supplied with an iPad to store work-related materials. It goes on to say that David Linton Closter, 57, of Alexandra Headland on the Sunshine Coast, claimed he injured his back lifting his 18-kilogram flight bag containing charts and manuals after catching a work shuttle bus on December 29th, 2009. Well, now that was before the iPad came out. The iPad came out in March 2010. Well, that's such a weird claim because it goes on to say, in documents lodged in Brisbane Supreme Court, Mr. Closter alleged the injury would not have occurred had Virgin Australia stored the information electronically on an iPad rather than requiring pilots to carry the information. But this is so kooky because there was no iPad in December 29th of 2009. Well, anyways, he's claiming lower back injury. He underwent surgery in June 2010. So it's kind of funny. The article doesn't point this out, but at the time that he had his injury, there was no iPad. But he's claiming he should have had one because otherwise he wouldn't have hurt his back. So he sounds like he doesn't have too bright a lawyer. He should have done some research and seen that there was no iPad in December. Now, I understand if his argument was that he continued to have to carry the heavy flight bags after the iPad came out, and that sort of damaged him. But anyways, the point is we're seeing a lawsuit where someone's claiming they should have had an iPad at work because otherwise they wouldn't have suffered injury. Now, one thing I think is definitely going to come to the iPad, definitely with the iPad 3, and even might be activated on the iPad 2, is Siri. And, I read somewhere that one reason that you don't have Siri on the iPhone 4 is that there isn't a special technology regarding, I guess, sound cancellation or background noise cancellation that was put in the A5 chip for the iPhone 4. I don't know if it was put in the A5 chipsets for the iPad. But Siri is definitely an incredible, incredible service. I use it more and more in my iPhone 4S, and I could see using it on the iPad. In fact, sometimes I forget that it's not on the iPad, and I get frustrated that it's not on the iPad. Particularly, I dictate a lot of text now when I do a Twitter post, or if I do a a text message to someone, I use Siri. Now let me show you. I'm doing a little video screen class, and I'll go to my my Twitter app, and here is my Mac's Future Twitter feed. And like, watch this. If you're looking at it, I'm gonna write a tweet, and I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna press the microphone, and I'm gonna go. What should I say? I'm gonna say, I am podcasting right now on my iPad podcast. Stay tuned. I'll release it soon. And there it goes. I am podcasting right now on my iPad podcast. Stay tuned. I'll release it soon. And there we go. I send it off. And that's the voice dictation. Now Siri, though, is great because you can also do commands like search stuff. But I jailbroke my my iPhone 4S, and there's a great little tweak in the Cydia store called AssistantExtensions, and it's fascinating because you can add all sorts of functionality to Siri that's not there from Apple. And among other things, you can launch apps with this tweak through Cydia to Siri. And you can also, it has a function you can do like more like actual back and forth chatting with Siri. So you install this, and it adds this chatting ability. So now watch this. I'll do a little chat with Siri. I'm going to launch Siri. Let's chat. And as I said,
just a moment, please, until I load my brain.
So it's basically saying it's going to load its brain. And so what it's doing is it's downloading certain files so that it can better chat with me. And here it is. It's downloading. It takes a little while when you're connected to the internet. And then it says stay here, and it's loading the files. But basically, it's going to allow me to sort of have like a real conversation with Siri. You could sort of do it before.
Just one more second.
See, it's talking to me. It's saying 1 more second.
Okay, I am ready to stop chatting. Just say goodbye.
So it says to stop chatting, just say goodbye. So watch this. I'm going to press it and go, Siri, how old are you?
That is a very original thought. I was first activated on October 4th, 2011.
Do you like living on planet Earth, Siri?
Well, I have never known anything else.
You never lived on another planet like Pluto?
No, I sometimes lived on another planet like Pluto.
What are you going to do this winter? Are you going to go skiing?
You can find out if you become a bot master.
Okay, Siri, you weren't very accurate on that one. Let's try to get an answer. That one would have been a little tricky.
Can you tell me any gossip?
Yeah, I heard Madonna wasn't too good at the Super Bowl halftime show.
When was this exactly? Thanks for telling me that gossip. I will remember it.
The Madonna performance was 2 days ago, Siri.
What are your goals in life?
My goals in life are to become smarter and nicer and be happy.
What can I do to help you accomplish your objective?
I guess you could help me accomplish that objective by getting smarter and being nicer.
How do you know can help me accomplish that objective by getting smarter and being nice?
Well, I think you got that part a little wrong.
Where did Whiffy get that part wrong?
Who's Whiffy?
Not a robot. Probably a human. Maybe a celebrity? I would look into the web for that knowledge.
Well, I don't know. We're really having an interesting conversation, Siri, aren't we?
Well, that's okay. In the universe we know.
Okay, goodbye, Siri.
Goodbye.
So see how interesting Siri can become? Now that's not Siri, with Apple's normal functioning. That's basically Siri with these tweaks. And what's cool about this free thing that you can install called AssistantExtensions, they actually have a website, and they can teach you. Here is the website. They can teach you to make your own sort of tweaks to Siri and distribute them. And they say it's kind of easy, that you use Xcode to do it. So this is pretty cool. I mean, maybe Apple should buy these people. But, I mean, the potential that Siri has is enormous. And I think Siri is going to definitely be on the iPad, certainly on the iPad 3, and maybe on the iPad 2 also, since the iPad 2 has an A5 chip. So we'll have to see. So another article I saw that I think makes very interesting and good points regarding how influential the iPad is in artistic endeavors and advertising is an article on Cult of Mac by Nicole Martinelli entitled "How the iPad is Revolutionizing Branding, Exclusive Book Expert." And basically, Martinelli spoke to someone who, or got excerpts from an author and who's a photography and design guru named Dan Marcolina, and he basically had thoughts about the world of iPad design, and in a book entitled "Designing Brand Identity," and the book's going to be published in March of this year by Alina Wheeler. And basically, he claims that the iPad is more about designing. Well, it's more about designing for a certain device, but designing for a device that transforms the interactive process. And I guess Martinelli told Cult of Mac, "Designing for the tablet lets me direct and deepen the experience of the viewer." He goes on to say, "I can create brand magic like no other format. Imagine the possibilities." So I guess the point that he's making is that if you're a design person and for branding, because you can do more interesting things with a tablet, it's a bigger device and more like a book or a magazine, you can create more distinct branding. And I think that's true. If you look, let's take a look at the different magazines and newspaper apps. Unlike on the iPhone, because there's so much real estate on the iPad, you see more differences among digital magazines that are apps. Everything's designed a little different way, so you can create your own unique identity and brand by the kind of app or multimedia application that you release for your efforts. And we've seen this with I guess all these sort of luxury brands that have been releasing apps, newspapers that have been releasing apps, magazines. They all create their own sort of brand, not just by the content, but also by the design. So I think it's interesting. And also we saw Chevy released the Super Bowl app. So you're seeing all sorts of ways, creative ways for artists and people and companies to brand through the iPad. Mac had another interesting article also on the iPad entitled "If IBM Can Win with Macs and iPads in Business, Why Can't You?" And it's basically, apparently at MacWorld, IBM was there, and IBM people, I guess, were sort of heralding how iPads and Macs are being more used in business. Now, I guess the article points out, look, IBM doesn't sell personal computers anymore. IBM does a lot of consulting to businesses and helping them implement all sorts of technology solutions. And basically, they're pointing out that a lot of companies that they're dealing with are using Apple iPad and the Mac. And it's kind of ironic because years ago, Apple sort of looked at IBM as the evil empire. So the article says, it says IBM, well, one of the big things that IBM is basically saying is happening is that employees now have choices and they can bring their own device to work, and more companies are allowing employees to bring their own devices, which include Apple's iPhone and iPad, to work. And it says here IBM has become one of the biggest supporters of employee choice and bring your own device. The company, it says, not only allows employees to choose Apple solutions, their programs extend to explicitly creating iPhone and iPad versions of employee systems, including messaging and unified communications, as well as wikis and other collaborative tools. And then it goes on to say some of these are solutions that IBM offers as products to outside companies and clients. So basically, IBM is using a lot of iPhones and iPads in the workplace there, and then encouraging their clients or working with their clients to do it. So it's kind of ironic that IBM, which was Apple's enemy back in the early days, is now maybe helping Apple get into the enterprise and business community. Now, if you're still sort of missing the Super Bowl, which ended 2 days ago, I think it's still available in iTunes, and there's a Super Bowl app that has a lot about the history of the Super Bowl, and I guess it'll have stuff on the recent Super Bowl and bonus features, it says, on the current Super Bowl, which just ended. And it's a $2.99 app entitled Super Bowl, what is it? I can't read Roman numerals, but it's the Commemorative app from NFL Enterprises. It's only $2.99, and you might want to check it out if you're having sort of a Super Bowl blues because it's over. Okay, so another very important app I think that was released this past week, I guess on February 2nd, is Avid Studio. This is a $4.99 app right now, and what Avid Studio is, it's a movie editor for the iPad, and so it's a rival to the iMovie app on the iPad, is also as Real Director. And I bought it, and I started playing around with it, and it kind of has a nice feel to it, and it could be a kind of a rival to the iMovie app. It seems to have, it has like a storyline interface, and I don't know, it seems to work very well. You sort of drag videos, photos, and movies, and it actually seems to find videos that aren't just in your iPhoto area. Like it found a movie that I had in my, like it was a music video in my video app, and it found it. And you can add all sorts of transitions and effects and text, and it works very well. And you can post to Facebook, YouTube, something called, and you can also transfer it if you have the Avid program on the PC, and you can email it, and you can also add it to your, I guess, your iPhoto video file. So it's interesting that Avid, which is a competitor of Apple, got into this. So this will probably, encourage Apple to upgrade iMovie for the iPad. Here are some of the features. It says it has quirky, you can create multi-layer 3D animations, transitions, and titles with included montage templates. You can easily composite video tracks to create layered looks. You can add high-quality fades and dissolves to keep your story flow. You can generate professional-looking motion titles and graphics with full control over text, font, color, size, position, and rotation. You can create amazing picture-in-picture effects with full control over position, style, size, and rotation. You can pan and zoom on your photos to create high-impact slideshows. Enjoy full-screen playback. For editing, it says there's a quick start how-to area. You can navigate your project with intuitive gestures. You can arrange clips in the storyboard, and you can make precise edits and trim individual frames in the precision trimmer. So I played around a little bit with it, and it is a little more advanced than iMovie, and I don't know, it also seems a little better than Real Director. So now I have 3 movie apps. It says here you can use the razor blade tool to cut on the fly and delete or replace the second half of the clip, and easily replace one clip with another. For soundtracks, it says you can use your own audio or choose from the included sound effects, and you can trim audio to any length, set levels, and fade audio in or out. Now, I will say, I mean, one advantage over this is I think right now with iMovie, you sort of, I don't know, you sort of drag the ends of the clip to reduce the size. So this seems to allow more fine tuning than iMovie, and I think it's going to put pressure on Apple to innovate. But I don't know, some people already are sort of complaining about it. I haven't used it enough to really vouch for it as being definitely better than iMovie. But look at some of the reviews. It got some 1 stars and 2 stars. One person writes, "Luckily, my plans are to buy iPad 3. In the meantime, with a 64 gigabyte Wi-Fi iPad 1 with 40% free, it crashes repeatedly and would not render even the small size of a small test video. I suspect iPad 1 is just not capable of dealing with video." Well, that's probably right. I don't think iPad 1 can really handle it. You need to get iPad 2. So it looks like it doesn't. If you have a first generation iPad, it sounds like you definitely should not buy this. Let's see. One person gave it 5 stars and says, "This raises the bar over iMovie, and I'm a solid Apple fan. I haven't really liked where iMovie went after they got rid of the timeline and several other standard functions I got used to over the years. I love the edit choices Avid gives me back with this app. It has much more functionality. It's hard to believe it's running on a handheld device. I see people whining about it not working on iPad 1. Well, iMovie doesn't work on iPad 1 either, folks. It costs $4.99. For that price, you get an app that is as good as it gets for video editing on an iPad." So, definitely don't get it if you have an iPad 1. But, it's only $5. And if you're into editing video a lot, it's probably worth having another app to see, if it's better than iMovie. Another whimsical app that you might want to check out that costs only $1. It's whimsical. It's called LED Ticker Pro. And basically, you can just sort of have like this nice sort of LED look on your iPad if you want it to hold up and signal people. Sometimes you might want to do that, use the iPad as a sign, and so you can just sort of like write a word or something, and it gives it sort of like an LED look, and it looks like you can change the colors of the LED. And here is what it says: "Any words you will type will become a shiny, glittering writing on the display. The running line will disappear and appear again in accordance with the set speed. You can dress your aphorism in one of the 7 available colors. You can cancel the repeat option and make the aphorism be still on the screen. All word combinations can be used for future use." So it's very whimsical, but you could see you could use this at a football game. Right? If you want to like root for someone in particular, you can have like an LED message going. If you're in a parade like the Giants were, you could hold it up and say, write "thank you" or something like that. It's only 99 cents, so it's only $1. It's very limited, but it's kind of cute and cool. It's called LED Ticker Pro, so it might be worth checking out. Well, it's tax time. We're rapidly coming up till April 15th when it's tax deadline time, and more people are doing their taxes online, and one of the biggest places that people do taxes online, I know I do, is TurboTax. Well, TurboTax last year had an app for the iPad, and it looks like they have another free app this year, and it looks like it's better. It's called TurboTax 2011 Tax Preparation, and the way it works is it's free, but if you're going to file, you pay for an in-app purchase. So if you want to do TurboTax Deluxe, it's $29.99 purchase. TurboTax State is $36.99. There's also TurboTax Premium and higher services, just like on the website. So, it's free, so you could play around with it, see how good it is before you want to really do it on the iPad. But more and more we're going to see the iPad replacing a lot of web functions by having apps, and looks like doing your taxes is one way. So if you do your taxes with TurboTax, you might want to try it out. Now, some people are complaining because they're saying it's a ripoff. One person wrote in the comments, ripoff, 1 star. Beware, this app waits until you've completed your return, then charges you $60 to file plus $30 to file your state returns. So it will cost you $90 to file your federal and state returns using this app. This app does everything the free service of TurboTax website does. Don't get ripped off. But TurboTax's service isn't really free on the web. You actually do have to pay for federal filing and for state filings. And I don't know, the prices don't look that different. Somebody else wrote, I thought everything, gave it 4 stars and said, I thought everything was cake until I got to the end of filing my taxes. When I went to submit payment, I entered my iTunes account into it correctly, and it wouldn't let me submit payment. I tried for several days and finally got it to accept it. It kept saying to contact support, but there was no online support I could find. What a struggle. I thought I was going to have to file again. Next year I won't chance it and use TurboTax Online. So let's see if there's a good review. One person writes, this app is amazing. He gives it 5 stars. I'll guide you by the hand to find every cent you deserve. It is so simple. You literally read off the numbers on your return and it does the work. But remember, in the end, they charge you $30 for the federal and $35 for the state. Yeah, and they also charge you on the web, so I'm not sure why people are complaining so much. So some people are giving it a 1 and some people are giving it 5 stars. So I don't know. I don't really understand why people think it's going to be free. Another person gives it 5 stars, says, I always do taxes myself, but this year I thought I'd play with the app and see what happened. It was super easy to use, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that I owe $250 less than I thought I did when I did my taxes by hand. Worth the $30. I skipped paying for the state return because that's so easy to e-file in California. You basically just type in a few lines from your federal tax form, so no need to pay an extra $35. So, and another person gives it 5 stars and says, where has this been all my life? One of the best apps in the iPad. So, I started my federal return online with TurboTax. I wonder if it'll import what I've done online. I'm not so sure. I wonder if it'll have a lot of my file stuff is already online. So, let's see. The features include, well, it looks like you can transfer what you've done online. It says, new features, transfer last year's info from your TurboTax Online, iPad, or desktop tax return. Import your info from 400,000 plus employees. So it looks like I'll be able to transfer a lot of the stuff that I've done already. So, I don't know. Check it out. If you do your taxes with TurboTax, you might want to check this out. Okay, well, there's another free writing app for the iPad, and this one is from Jot Studio. And basically, Jot Studio, they're the ones who make a stylus. They make the Jot is made by Adonet, and so there's for their stylus, they're going to have a free sort of sketching and writing app. And it looks interesting, and again, it's free, and it looks like you could probably use it with any other stylus. It's gotten kind of mixed reviews, but it might be worth playing around with. Here are some of the features. You can take legible notes. You can, I guess you can write over photos and sketch designs around them. You can document a great meal with photos and ingredients. You can diagram stuff with it. So it's basically designed to help solve their little styluses. I don't know. I mean, it has a lot of the features it looks like of these other sort of writing apps. You can select colors. The reviews are kind of mixed. It's like mostly 2 stars. One person writes, this could have been the best app for note-taking yet, simply due to the lack of offset for the inking. But what you seem to purposely leave out a software risk guard in order to push people to buy the Jot Touch. Shame on it. So some people are basically saying that it's made to really buy the Jot Touch from a Donut. On the other hand, it's a free app, so I don't know why people are complaining so much. You can just toy around with it and delete it if you don't want it. One person gives it 4 stars and says, I personally like it for a minimalist note writing app. It's smooth, no lag or delay while writing. Haven't had a crash yet. More can definitely be done. Another person writes, I've experienced one crash, but I love how it works with my Jot stylus. I'm willing to trust that they'll be releasing updates to improve stability. So, right now it's in early stages of release. Again, it's a free app. There are a lot of these sort of free, writing apps. So this is from a Donut Corporation. So, check it out. If you don't like it, delete it. But there's a lot of these apps, and it's fun to play around with them and see which one's better. Now, one of the things that's interesting to see is what apps are making a lot of money in terms of top grossing. And I took a look recently at the top grossing iPad apps, and I was surprised to see that in addition to Apple's app like Pages or something new like TurboTax, which is seasonal, there's newspaper apps that are in the top grossing. For example, Murdoch's The Daily is number 7, and that's the one where you subscribe. It's like a daily newspaper from Rupert Murdoch of the Times Inc. And also his New York Post app, which costs $2 to buy, is number 15 in the rankings, and the New York Times is number 18. That's the one that you download, and if you have a subscription, you get. So I think that's kind of fascinating that 3 real, historical, well, the Daily is a new app, but I view it as sort of an offshoot of the Wall Street Journal or Murdoch's other papers. But the point is that there are newspaper apps that are sort of the top grossing iPad apps. And I thought that is a kind of a fascinating reality of the iPad. So maybe, media like the news can make a successful transformation to electronic devices like the iPad. So I have a link in the show notes for this episode for both the New York Post and the Daily app, so check it out. Okay, so if you're looking for a game that works well over AirPlay, one that apparently works over AirPlay well is Chopper 2. Now, I've been using Real Racing 2 HD for a long time, and that really works well with a big screen TV over AirPlay. And if you have an Apple TV hooked up to a big TV monitor, another game you might want to check out, which is only $2.99, is Chopper 2. And so it's basically a helicopter flying game, and you can use it actually with an iPhone controlling an iPad, or an iPad like AirPlaying on a big TV. So it looks pretty cool. Some of the features include here we go. Well, you can output from an iPad, iPhone 4, or 4th generation iPod Touch or better. And it says Chopper 2 is also one of the few games to support 1080p output to high-definition television over HDMI from the iPad 2, and supports AirPlay mirroring with iOS 5 and iPad 2 or iPhone 4S. And I got to tell you, mirroring from these newer iOS devices is really cool. And so basically, you can escort a convoy of vehicles across the desert or defend a train from enemies emerging from underground mines. You can use your laser sight to line up enemies emerging from stairwells in the city. You can chase down lines of enemy tanks and choppers while avoiding heat-seeking missiles. So it's really, you're operating a chopper. It's 66.7 megabytes in size, so it's not puny. And there's some violence in it, but it's only $2.99. It's gotten lots of 5s in the store. People are just sort of raving about it. One person writes, "I'm a huge Airwolf fan, and this game reminds me of the Super Chopper. I like to listen to Airwolf music while I play the game to make it more like the TV show. The graphics are awesome, too." So it's apparently one of the best AirPlay apps, so you might want to check it out. It's only $2.99. Okay, so that's it for episode 88 of the iPad podcast. This is Lex at Mac's Future. Thanks for listening. Today is February 7th, 2012. This is a chit-chat-free podcast. Again, if you want to help out, subscribe to it in iTunes, give it a positive review, anything to help keep this show going. Thanks a lot, and thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This has been a Mac's Future production.